Chapter 1. The dinner begins. I still remember the glow of the city lights that night, bouncing off the glass windows of the steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. The company had chosen one of those expensive restaurants where the booths are leather, the lighting is low, and the servers glide around as if they're on stage. It wasn't just a dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration of a year's worth of work, a reward for long nights, endless meetings, and the sacrifices most of us had made. Sacrifices that, if I'm being honest, had eaten away at more than one relationship. I had flown in from Chicago that morning, tired but hopeful. For weeks, this dinner had been hyped up. Mr. Thompson wants to thank the team in person, Sarah from HR had told us, her voice carrying that practiced enthusiasm that only HR professionals seem to master. I wasn't naive. I knew these events weren't about recognition, not really. They were about appearances, about power, about Mr. Thompson reminding us who sat at the head of the table. The restaurant smelled of charred steak and red wine. The air itself seemed expensive. As I walked in, I spotted my colleagues scattered around the long mahogany table. Sarah was already sipping on a glass of white wine, laughing too loudly at something Mike from finance had said. Jennifer, in a sleek black dress, was adjusting her hair in the reflection of her wine glass. Everyone looked like they were performing, as though the restaurant was less a place to eat and more a stage where every smile was a carefully rehearsed line. Mr. Thompson sat at the head, of course. He was in his mid-50s, tall and broad, with the kind of presence that sucked all the air out of a room. His suit was custom-tailored, his cufflinks gleaming under the low light. He wasn't speaking when I walked in, but even in silence, his posture, the way he leaned back with one hand resting over his glass of scotch, carried a message. This is my table, and you're all just lucky to be sitting at it. Hey, you made it? Sarah said as I slid into a chair across from her. Her tone was warm, but her eyes flickered nervously toward Mr. Thompson. She lowered her voice. Be careful tonight. He's in one of his moods. That wasn't unusual. Mr. Thompson had moods the way New York had traffic, constant, inevitable, and exhausting. Still, there was something heavier in the air that night. A sharp edge, like the clink of glassware just before it shatters. Dinner began with small talk, the kind that feels rehearsed, with everyone trying too hard. Mike bragged about closing a deal that technically had been a team effort. Jennifer dropped names of people she'd supposedly met at a marketing conference. I nodded, smiled, played my part. I had grown used to being invisible at these things. My role was to keep projects on track, to handle the messy details no one else wanted to bother with. The truth was, most of my work never made it into the spotlight. It was like building the foundation of a house and watching everyone else take credit for decorating the walls. The first round of steaks arrived, sizzling on iron skillets, the smell of butter and garlic heavy in the air. The waiter poured glasses of Cabernet without asking. It was that kind of place, the kind where the bill could feed a family for a month. Mr. Thompson raised his glass. To a successful year, he said, his voice carrying that mix of authority and arrogance that only he could deliver. Everyone raised their glasses, some more enthusiastically than others. And to the people who made it happen, he added. His eyes scanned the table, pausing deliberately on Mike, then Jennifer. He didn't even glance in my direction. We clinked glasses, the sound sharp and hollow. I took a sip, letting the wine roll over my tongue, bitter and heavy. It should have felt like a moment of pride, but instead, it felt like standing in the shadows, watching someone else soak up the light. I told myself it didn't matter. That recognition wasn't why I worked the long hours. But deep down it did matter. It mattered because this dinner, this table, was supposed to be about the team. And yet, somehow, it was already clear who was meant to shine and who was meant to disappear into the background. That was the thing about Mr. Thompson. He didn't just ignore you. He erased you, made you feel smaller than you already did. And I could feel it happening again that night, piece by piece. With every laugh directed at Mike's stories and every approving nod given to Jennifer. I kept my smile fixed, my voice steady, but inside something stirred, something sharp. something that would only grow stronger as the night went on. Because before the night was over, I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. Chapter 2. The Words That Cut. The dinner moved forward the way these things always did, slowly, with too much food and too much wine. The waiters floated in and out like ghosts, dropping off side dishes of creamed spinach, mashed potatoes, and baskets of warm bread. The smell of roasted garlic clung to the air, but beneath it there was something else, a tension that kept tightening around the table like an invisible rope. Mr. Thompson was in rare form. He had always loved an audience, and tonight he had one. Every time he raised his voice, laughter followed. Every time he leaned in, people leaned closer. It was like watching gravity work, except it wasn't gravity pulling us. It was fear, status, ambition. "Mike," he said loudly, cutting off Sarah mid-sentence, "tell them about the investor meeting last month." "You know, the one I sent you to." Mike straightened his tie, his face glowing with pride. He launched into the story, describing the glossy boardroom, the sharp questions, the way he had handled everything. What he didn't say, what no one said, was that I had prepared the entire pitch deck, rehearsed with him for hours, and even fielded half the client's questions through email while Mike was still in the room. But that wasn't the story being told tonight. "That's what I'm talking about," Mr. Thompson bellowed when Mike finished, slapping the table so hard the glasses rattled. "That's leadership. That's initiative." Everyone clapped, some politely, some eagerly. I clapped too, though my palms stung with something that wasn't applause. Jennifer jumped in next, talking about a campaign she had led. She exaggerated her role, of course, but Mr. Thompson ate it up. "Brilliant work," he said, wagging a finger at her like she was his star pupil. Then his eyes landed on me. For the first time all night, he really looked at me. The attention should have felt like a gift, but it was more like the moment a spotlight blinds you. "And then there's you," he said, his voice dropping lower, more deliberate. He leaned back in his chair, one arm stretched over the backrest as though he owned the entire restaurant. "The quiet one, what do you even do again?" The table chuckled nervously. Heat rose to my face. I forced a polite smile. "Project management, sir." Right. Project management," he cut me off, waving his hand dismissively. "The guy who makes spreadsheets and sends reminders." The guy in the background. A couple of people laughed louder this time, maybe to show they weren't on my side. "Let's be honest," Mr. Thompson continued, swirling the scotch in his glass. "People like you are replaceable. You do the busy work, sure. But leaders like Mike and Jennifer, those are the people who drive this company forward." The words landed heavier than I expected. Replaceable. He said it like it was fact, like it was written in stone. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't hear anything but the pounding in my ears. Sarah shifted uncomfortably beside me. She gave me a sympathetic glance, but she didn't speak. No one did. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that says everything. We're not going to stand up for you. We're not going to risk our own place at this table. I laughed softly, though it wasn't humor that spilled out. It was survival. "Well, someone has to keep things organized," I said lightly. Mr. Thompson smirked. "Organized? Please. A calendar app could replace half your job. Don't take it personally, it's just reality." The table erupted into laughter, louder this time. Even the waiter, passing by with a tray, glanced over awkwardly, unsure if he had just overheard a joke or a cruelty. My hands clenched under the table. I stared at the steak on my plate, the charred edges already cooling. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes, the way some of them avoided looking directly at me while others smirked behind their glasses. I wanted to say something. To shout. To remind him of the nights I'd spent fixing Mike's mistakes, the weekends I had sacrificed to keep Jennifer's projects on track, the countless fires I had put out without ever asking for credit. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I sat there, silent, while the man who signed my paycheck declared me useless in front of everyone I worked with. The laughter eventually faded, replaced by the clinking of silverware as people returned to their meals. Mr. Thompson had already moved on, launching into another story about a deal he had closed single-handedly, as if the moment hadn't just happened. As if my worth had not been stripped bare in front of the entire team, but I hadn't forgotten. The word echoed in my head with every bite I forced. Down. Replaceable. 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 What? Mr. Thompson didn't know. What no one at that table knew was that I had already made a decision before I even stepped foot in that restaurant. I hadn't flown in from Chicago just for dinner. I had come with something folded neatly inside my jacket pocket, something that would change everything. And the more I replayed his words, the clearer it became. Tonight would be the night I used it. Chapter 3. Echoes of Silence. The rest of the table carried on as if nothing had happened. Forks scraped plates, wine glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell in waves. But to me, the world had shifted. My boss's words clung to me like smoke, seeping into every thought. Replaceable. Sarah tried to change the subject, asking Jennifer about her latest campaign, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, filled with a quiet apology. Mike avoided me altogether, too wrapped up in the glow of Mr. Thompson's approval. And Mr. Thompson himself, he had already moved on, retelling some exaggerated story about closing a deal in Houston, his booming laugh filling the restaurant like the sound of a gavel. It was strange sitting there, watching everyone laugh as if they hadn't just witnessed a man strip another of his dignity. The silence of my colleagues hurt more than Mr. Thompson's words. It was the silence of complicity, the silence of people who would rather see you sink than risk their own balance. I chewed slowly, the steak on my plate tasteless, my throat dry no matter how much wine I swallowed. Around me, the world blurred, the dim lights, the soft jazz playing over the speakers, the smell of butter and seared meat. All of it faded into the background, replaced by memories of the nights that had led me here. I saw myself in the office in Chicago, alone on a Sunday night, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Mike had sent me a text. Need those numbers cleaned up before Monday. He was probably at home, feet up, a game on TV. But there I was, hunched over spreadsheets, correcting mistakes that weren't mine. Then another memory. Jennifer's marketing campaign last spring. She had stormed into my office at 6 p.m. on a Friday, panic in her voice. If we don't get the client presentation fixed, we'll lose them. I had stayed until midnight, redesigning the slides, rewriting half the copy, even troubleshooting the software when it crashed. Monday morning, she stood in front of the client and took all the credit. Mr. Thompson had shaken her hand afterward, congratulating her brilliance. I remembered the late nights, the weekends, the birthdays I missed. The phone calls from my mother I ignored because work needed me. I remembered the pride I had felt, not because anyone noticed, but because I knew I was the one holding things together. And yet here I was, in a restaurant filled with laughter branded as replaceable. The sound of silverware snapped me back. The waiter leaned over me, offering to refill my glass. I nodded, though I didn't really want it. As he poured, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished silver pitcher. Tired eyes, shoulders slightly hunched, a face that looked far older than 32. Mr. Thompson's voice cut through again. You see, leadership isn't about doing the little things, he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. It's about vision. It's about commanding the room. Some people are born with it, others... His eyes slid toward me, though just for a second. Well, let's just say they stay behind the curtain. The table laughed again. My pulse thudded in my ears, but then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was exhaustion, maybe both. Instead of shrinking into myself, I sat up straighter. I let the word replaceable echo in my head one last time, and then I started to imagine what it would feel like to prove him wrong. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Tonight. Sarah leaned closer, whispering, Don't let him get to you. He does this to everyone. I gave her a small smile. Not like this, I said quietly. Because it wasn't just a jab. It wasn't just a joke. It was a declaration, one that cut through every sacrifice I had ever made. And I wasn't going to let it stand. I reached under the table, my hand brushing against the inside pocket of my jacket. I could feel the crisp fold of the envelope waiting there, the one I had brought with me all the way from Chicago. My resignation letter, my freedom, written in black ink on white paper. I didn't pull it out yet. Not yet, timing mattered. The right moment would come, and when it did, the entire table would remember it. For now, I sat there watching Mr. Thompson bask in his own voice, listening to Mike laugh too loudly at every joke, to Jennifer lean in too eagerly, to Sarah try and hold her discomfort behind a polite smile. I let them think I was small. I let them believe I had no power, because the truth was the night wasn't over. And when it ended, none of them would look at me the same way again. Chapter 4. The letter on the table. The night had stretched long, but instead of softening, the edges only grew sharper. Laughter had become louder, the clinking of glasses more careless. People were loosening ties, leaning back in their chairs, voices carrying over each other as if the restaurant belonged entirely to us. But I wasn't laughing. I wasn't leaning back. I was waiting. Mr. Thompson was in his element now, riding the wave of attention. He had moved on from mocking me to retelling old war stories from his career, each one more self-glorified than the last. "When I was your age," he said, pointing his glass toward Mike, "I was already managing million-dollar accounts. You can't wait for someone to hand you responsibility. You take it." Mike nodded enthusiastically, his eyes shining with the eagerness of a man desperate for approval. Jennifer chimed in with a question, feeding the performance. Sarah kept quiet, her eyes darting between me and the boss, as though she sensed something was building. I sipped my wine slowly, my hand resting against the envelope inside my jacket pocket. My heart beat steady now, not frantic like before. I had made my choice. And then it happened. The moment I had been waiting for. "Let's be honest," Mr. Thompson said, his voice louder than necessary, drawing glances from nearby tables. He gestured toward me with the sweep of his hand. "Every team has a weak link, someone who shows up, does the basics, and disappears. They don't make waves. They don't lead. They're just there." The table chuckled, though it wasn't laughter anymore. It was relief. Relief that it wasn't them in the crosshairs. "And in this case," he continued, his eyes locking on mine, "that's you." He raised his glass in mock salute. "To the man behind the spreadsheets, may the next intern learn his job just as well." The laughter erupted again, but this time I didn't hear it as humiliation. I heard it as opportunity. I pushed my chair back slowly. The sound of the legs scraping against the polished floor cut through the noise. Conversations faltered. Forks paused midair. Even Mr. Thompson's booming voice dimmed as he looked at me with a raised brow. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. White, crisp, folded neatly, my name signed at the bottom of the letter inside. For a second, I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, not in paper, but in meaning. Years of late nights, ignored sacrifices, invisible labor. Every hour I had poured into holding things together. All of it was in that envelope. I stepped closer to Mr. Thompson, my voice calm, steady. "You're right," I said, meeting his eyes. "I am replaceable, which is why you'll need to start looking tomorrow." And with that, I placed the envelope on the table in front of him. The room went silent. Not just our table, the surrounding ones too. A few nearby diners had turned to watch, sensing the drama unfolding. The only sound was the faint hiss of steak still sizzling on a distant skillet. Mr. Thompson blinked, his smirk faltering. "What's this?" "My resignation," I said simply. His laugh came late, forced, like he was trying to pull the room back into his orbit. "You can't be serious." But I didn't flinch. Completely serious, effective immediately. Sarah's hand covered her mouth, eyes wide. Mike shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confidence draining away. Jennifer's fork clinked against her plate, her posture stiff with shock. I leaned down slightly, my voice low but carrying across the table. For years, I've cleaned up mistakes, filled in gaps, made sure projects didn't collapse under their own weight. You call that replaceable? Fine. Replace me. But when the cracks start showing, you'll realize who was really holding things together. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened, his hand hovering over the envelope but not touching it. His eyes searched mine, perhaps looking for hesitation, for weakness. But there was none left to find. I straightened, buttoned my jacket, and glanced around the table. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said calmly. Then I turned and began walking toward the door. Behind me, the silence remained. No one laughed, no one clapped. The room that had once been filled with noise was now frozen in disbelief. And as I stepped out into the New York night, the cool air hitting my face, I felt lighter than I had in years. Chapter 5. Walking Away. The night air of Manhattan wrapped around me as I stepped out of the restaurant, the door closing softly behind me. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the occasional honk of a taxi, the muffled laughter of strangers spilling out of nearby bars. Inside, the air had been thick with tension, suffocating. Out here, it felt like oxygen had finally returned to my lungs. I walked slowly toward the curb, the city alive around me, neon signs flickering, a line of yellow cabs crawling past, the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor mixing with the cold September breeze. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or client emails. I wasn't rehearsing excuses or making mental checklists. I was just me, free, untethered, with nothing but possibility in front of me. But freedom is a strange thing. It doesn't come without an aftertaste. As I waited for a cab, I felt the echoes of the dinner still vibrating inside me. The stunned silence, Sarah's wide eyes, Mike's awkward shifting, Jennifer's stiffened posture, and most of all, Mr. Thompson's face, the momentary crack in his confidence when he realized I had slipped out of his grip. He wasn't used to losing control, and I had just stolen it from him in front of his loyal audience. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications. Emails from HR, missed calls from an office number, and even a message from Sarah. "I can't believe you actually did it. Proud of you." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table of my small Chicago apartment, a cup of coffee in front of me, staring out the window as the city woke up. For once, I wasn't rushing. For once, the day wasn't dictating me. I was dictating the day. When I finally opened my laptop, I read through the messages. HR was concerned about the abrupt nature of my departure and requested an exit interview. Mr. Thompson himself hadn't reached out, but I didn't need him to. His silence said more than his words ever could. Then came the text from Mike. "Not cool, man. You made the whole team look bad." I almost laughed. Of course he would say that. Mike thrived in systems where people like me did the heavy lifting and people like him took the spotlight. My leaving wasn't just inconvenient for him. It was dangerous. It meant the scaffolding holding up his illusions was gone. Jennifer didn't text. She didn't need to. I knew she'd be scrambling already, trying to find someone else to catch her when she fell behind. But Sarah's words stuck with me the most. "Proud of you." They were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had seen, really seen, what I had endured. And in that, there was comfort. As the day stretched on, I thought about what replaceable really meant. The word had been thrown at me like an insult, but the truth was, he wasn't wrong. In that company, in that system, everyone was replaceable, because the system was designed that way. To chew people up, to make them compete, to make them forget their own worth until someone at the top reminded them of their place. But here's what Mr. Thompson hadn't counted on. Being replaceable there didn't make me replaceable everywhere. Because beyond those walls, beyond his approval, I was still the man who had held everything together, who had built, fixed, managed, and sacrificed. And somewhere out there would be a place where that mattered. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. My future wasn't mapped out yet. I didn't have another job waiting. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. What scared me more was the thought of staying, of shrinking, of letting someone like Mr. Thompson define my worth. And so, I closed my laptop, stood up, and stepped outside. The Chicago air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn. People hurried past on their way to work, their faces tight with routine. I walked slower than them, deliberately. Slower, as though to remind myself I no longer belonged to the same clock. I thought about that dinner again. The laughter, the silence, the envelope on the table. I pictured Mr. Thompson opening it after I left, his face tightening, his temper flaring. Maybe he cursed me under his breath. Maybe he shrugged it off, convincing himself I would regret it. But I didn't, because that night, when he called me replaceable, I finally realized something he never would. The only power he had over me was the power I gave him, and the moment I took it back, I wasn't replaceable anymore. I was free.